The concept of privilege, as it relates to a person's identity, is one of the most difficult subjects to discuss productively. Why? What is the problem with this particular debate? Well, perhaps it's this. Ordinarily, a healthy debate about any subject would stay focused on the subject matter itself, on the merits of the arguments themselves, and would never, ever become personal. However, a discussion about privilege will inevitably become personal because the personal background of those having the discussion is the subject matter. No wonder, then, it's such a precarious concept to entertain. This, in spite of the fact that it's actually a simple theory. The definition of privilege is a right or immunity granted as a peculiar benefit, advantage, or favor. According to the theory of privilege, privileges are not earned, but inherited through the good fortune of an individual's birth. Some people inherit many privileges, and other people inherit few privileges. It's a theory, and a fascinating one at least. After all, everyone is born into a different environment, a series of circumstances that they are not responsible for. There's a common experiment that's conducted to illustrate this. A diverse group of individuals are lined up side by side and are then given cues such as, if you get time off for your religious holidays, take one step forward. If you've ever been diagnosed with a physical disability or a mental illness, take one step back, and the results are unsurprising. Some individuals are near the front of the room, and others are near the rear. So the central claim of this theory is not a controversial one. Some people are less fortunate than others through no fault of their own. And this establishes the bare bones criteria for a privilege, a characteristic or circumstance which A, presents advantages that are B, not earned, and C, are invisible to those who have them, which is a figurative way of saying that a person who has had a particular advantage their entire life does not know what life is like without that advantage. Simple enough. Those circumstances, those aspects of a person's life, are what's labeled privileges. These include, but cannot possibly be limited to, being white, being male, being straight or heterosexual, being able-bodied, wealthy or upper class, being educated, being tall, an American citizen, mentally healthy, stereotypically beautiful, having 2 married parents, being a Christian, young, having been well-raised as a child, speaking English, being skinny or thin, cisgender, and living in a country or any other setting in which there is no war. All of these circumstances and characteristics, so the argument goes, are privileges. Each one allegedly gives an individual a better likelihood that they will realize their full potential and make the most of their life. One thing that you might have noticed about these characteristics is that they don't have very much in common with one another. Race, class, attractiveness, parental guidance, height. These are all remarkably different ways of assessing a person's privilege or lack thereof. So let's start simple and analyze an obvious example. Wealth privilege. Money presents you with more options and opportunities in life. The more of it that you have, money also sustains a high quality of life, good schools, healthy food, safe communities, and the ability to travel. So if somebody was born into a wealthy family, that could safely be described as a privilege. Another example here that easily fits the standards might be the privilege of having an intact family, having 2 parents who are married to one another. According to numerous studies, children whose parents have gotten divorced are statistically less likely to be physically or emotionally healthy, more likely to drop out of high school, work lower-paying jobs, become addicted to drugs and alcohol, not to mention twice as likely to attempt suicide, and 300% more likely to require psychological help. Empirically, having an intact family is a privilege. The same could be said of being able to use your entire body, the privilege of being mentally healthy, the privilege of being well-raised, and the privilege of living in a state of peace, far removed from a war zone or any other military conflict. All of these circumstances satisfy the criteria. They grant advantages, which are unearned, and they are, according to the theory, invisible, which, again, is just a figurative way of saying that if you've always been wealthy, you don't know what it's like to be poor. If you're able-bodied, you don't know what it's like being unable to use your hands or your legs. If your family is intact, you don't know how it feels to live in a broken home, but if you do lack any of these privileges, you do know what it's like. All in all, the theory itself seems to make a fair observation. And so far, the examples that we've checked off fit very well into the framework of the theory. But if we take a look at some of the others here, we might not find that to be the case. One such characteristic would be tall privilege, a characteristic which is naturally unearned, but the benefits that come with being tall are conditional. Being tall is an advantage when grabbing something hard to reach. It is not an advantage when flying coach. There's also something to be said about height as it relates to dating, and by extension, natural selection. Studies have shown that a majority of heterosexual women prefer a man who is taller than they are, and heterosexual men as well generally prefer a woman who is shorter than they are. That makes being tall a privilege for men, but not so much a privilege for women in the context of dating. What difference does it make, one might ask, if a privilege is only a privilege conditionally? So what? Well, to answer that, it allows us to question part of this theory, that a privilege renders advantages. If a tall person, for example, is fortunate to be tall under certain conditions and unfortunate to be tall under other conditions, describing that characteristic simply as a privilege would seem to be biased. It would only acknowledge the advantages, and it would ignore the disadvantages. A great example of this would be American privilege. There are many aspects of American life which are better by comparison to life in other countries. However, there are other aspects of American life which are worse by comparison. But what really makes this trait a giant mess is that it is extremely debatable which ones are which. For example, many would argue that the right to bear arms is a positive aspect of American life, while others would argue that it is in fact a negative aspect. And this is just one example, one of many, many, many others. There are uncontroversial benefits that come with being an American, but because the theory of privilege is only concerned with advantages, it might not be the best way to understand a trait in which there are advantages and disadvantages. It might also call into question the second standard, that a privilege is unearned. That's not always the case with something like citizenship. Most Americans were born in the United States. Their citizenship was not earned. Some Americans, however, immigrated from another country. Their citizenship was earned. Are they, according to the theory, privileged to be an American? A similar question could be asked regarding thin people. Some people naturally stay thin due to their genetic makeup, God bless them, but other people can only stay thin if they diet and exercise. Those people work hard to maintain a thin body, in which case, according to the theory, they are not necessarily privileged to be thin. Even the privilege of having an education could be questioned on these grounds. Having access to an education is a privilege, but completing an education is a personal achievement, or at least it should be, as well as the grades that a student makes. So again, it seems like some of this is conditional. Not all of these characteristics are inherent all of the time. Some of them can be achieved. Body size, grade point average, citizenship, spoken language, religion, physical attractiveness to an extent, and even wealth. These things either can or must be obtained by someone who doesn't already have them. At this point, we could question the third standard as well, the invisibility of privilege. The notion of privilege being invisible makes sense, but only if you've had such a privilege for your entire life. Suppose you haven't. Suppose somebody was not always thin, or educated, or beautiful. Suppose somebody escapes a war-torn country and flees to another country that's in a state of peace. It's probably not fair to assume that the benefits of peace are invisible to that person because they have personally experienced life without those benefits. Each characteristic here entails different advantages under specific conditions to a varying degree of probability. Some of them render disadvantages, some of them can be earned, and the benefits entailed are not invisible to everyone who has them. Not to mention the fact that you can't tell most of this stuff about a person just by looking at them. Some, however, you can tell just by looking at them, and up until now, you've probably been waiting for the elephant or elephants in the room to be acknowledged. By far, the two most contested and publicized privileges of them all, male privilege and white privilege. These two, let's call them genres of privilege, are notoriously difficult to discuss productively, with white privilege perhaps being the slipperiest of them all.
If you, let me repeat this, and I'll do it slowly.
All right.
So even you can understand.
All right, all right.
If you work hard, if you get educated, if you're an honest person, you can make it in America.
If you live in a neighborhood where poverty is endemic, it's harder to work hard.
It's
harder to get an education.
Hey, it was harder for me than it was for the white guy in Garden City. It's all relative. Yes, it's harder if you're a ghetto kid. Yes, but can you do it? Yes!
Yes, you can. You can also win the 100-yard dash on one leg, but it's harder.
One reason for this, as was mentioned earlier, is that it's hard to have any conversation that becomes personal. But it also doesn't help that when people try to explain white privilege, they usually do so in a very fuzzy and uninformative way.
Does white privilege exist?
Absolutely.
It does.
Absolutely.
And where's the proof of that?
All around.
Give me some hints as to my white privilege.
You know, it's about role and it's about access, and what you can do is extend that privilege so that you can dismantle it, right? So you can create opportunity for people, you can amplify issues in ways that other people can't, and you can use your resources to create space for people.
It's basically a ticket to anything that everybody else is excluded from because of your skin color.
The truth is that white privilege doesn't act according to quantifiable segments. It's about the degree to which we are willing as a society to grapple with the ideals of freedom, justice, and equality upon which it's based.
White people were raised to think of ourselves as good people. And
we are good people.
And there is a moral thorn if you hear that you have had some things in your life that you didn't deserve, you didn't earn, but they came to you. So we're quite fragile on the subject, and whites are often defensive.
So where is the best place to begin in trying to understand this? When we were looking at these other types of privileges, you probably noticed a theme. It's all a matter of averages. Being healthy, being wealthy, being educated and good-looking, having an intact family, etc., all of these things render a higher likelihood of a fulfilling life. They don't guarantee it, they simply make the odds better. So, can we apply that premise to being white? Does being born white make a good life more likely? Let's be empirical about this and find out. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, from 2010 to 2014, white Americans represented the lowest percentage of students in high-poverty public schools. According to the Economic Policy Institute, the percentage of black people who are unemployed is higher than the percentage of white people, regardless of the level of education. According to Pew Research Center, whites are more likely to be born into an intact family, graduate high school, have a degree, own a house, live above the poverty line, and earn a higher household income, all relative to blacks, at least in the United States. What does all of this mean? It means that we have an abstract argument. A white newborn baby is, on average, more likely to be born to two married parents who are educated, own a house, and are not in poverty. In short, a white newborn baby is more likely to be born into a good environment. And being born into a good environment simply means that you are more likely to achieve a fulfilling life. This observation fits the framework of the theory. Being born into certain circumstances makes certain outcomes statistically more likely. The same holds true for male privilege, albeit being a man relative to a woman is notably grayer. On average, men are physically larger and stronger, earn a higher salary, are more likely to be a billionaire, a CEO, a politician, a business owner, and are less likely to be the victim of sexual assault relative to women. Men are also more likely to be killed at work or in war, lose custody of their children, wind up homeless, live a shorter life, and be a victim of aggravated assault relative to women, just to name very few examples. So the privilege of being a male American is a lot more conditional than the privilege of being a white American, but the general notion that being born a certain way makes certain outcomes more likely still appears to be a fair observation. So maybe the problem with this theory isn't the theory itself, but rather the way in which it is often applied. Privilege is often not approached abstractly, but rather concretely. The notion that success is more likely with privilege is bastardized into the assumption that success requires privilege. Now, what could possibly go wrong when that assumption is made? Suppose you have a conversation with a successful man without knowing his skin color. You might assume that the person you're talking to is white because white people are more likely to be successful relative to black people, and that would be an assumption. As with any assumption, it might be wrong.
I've chosen to cross different parts of the media world, done the work so that I'm qualified to be in each one. I never considered my color the issue. I considered my qualifications the issue.
Well, David, that's a whole nother long conversation about white privilege and things that you have the privilege of doing that people of color don't have the privilege of.
How do I have the privilege of white privilege?
David, by virtue of being a white male, you have white privilege. This whole long conversation, I don't have time to get into it.
Ariva, I hate to break it to you, but you should have been better prepped. I'm black.
Okay, then I stand.
See, you went to white privilege. This is the falsehood in this. You went immediately with an assumption.
David,
that's actually
David,
insulting.
It is, and I apologize because my people gave me wrong information.
Who gives you the wrong information that I'm white to come on my radio show? Think about that for a minute.
What did she say, her team? What was the bad information?
They gave her the wrong information. So
what does that mean?
Well, that's my question. How do you give someone the wrong information about my skin color?
During this interview, Ariva Martin used the abstract theory of privilege as the basis for a concrete assumption about David Webb. Martin's argument was that Webb could not have possibly accomplished all of the things that he had accomplished if he was black. Well, we know that's not true because David Webb is black. So what was wrong with Martin's argument? Simply put, her argument took the theory of privilege out of the abstract and applied it improperly by making an assumption about an individual. The theory of privilege states that certain characteristics make certain outcomes more probable. It does not state that certain outcomes are guaranteed, thus, this theory should not be used to make concrete predictions. Unfortunately, that's often how it is used.
You've never experienced depression in your entire life. Neither have I. You're a white male. You're a white man.
Imagine there was a study which found that red cars are more likely to end up in a traffic accident than blue cars. Based on such a study, you could argue, abstractly, that red cars are dangerous because they're more likely to end up in an accident relative to another car color. That would be fair. It would not be fair to assume that every single red car will eventually cause a crash, nor would it be fair to assume that blue cars will never crash. There are too many other variables that contribute to car accidents, and they all need to be taken into consideration. The same principle applies to privilege. Being white and or male does not guarantee a privileged life because it is possible for a white man to be gay, poor, ugly, disabled, uneducated, medicating a mental disorder, or the product of a broken home. It's also possible for, say, a black woman to be straight, rich, beautiful, able-bodied, educated, mentally healthy, and a member of an intact family. Such a black woman would arguably be more privileged than such a white man. Even if you knew everything about another person, you'd likely find that they were a hodgepodge of fortunate and unfortunate character traits. Someone who is intelligent, but ugly. Physically healthy, but mentally unhealthy. Male, but short. In short, everybody has a relative amount of privilege. A very plain point, very well made by Tiffany Jana, founder and CEO of TMI Consulting.
The more I thought about what other people thought of me and what other people had done to me, the less I was able to believe in my full potential. And that's one of the problems with privilege. I was so fixated on the privilege that I didn't have that I missed much of the privilege that I do have. I missed the fact that being an army brat and having international experience and being multilingual and having a great education and a mom with a PhD and a dad with an MD all gave me plenty of opportunities for success. And that's one of the traps our society lays for us. We think of privilege as something that you either have or you don't have. It's like a switch, either it's on or it's off. And if we allow ourselves to focus on the privileges that we don't have, then it's really easy for us to become blind to the ones we do have.
Once this theory has been driven all the way to its destination, we find ourselves right around where we started, with the simple fact that everyone is born into a different environment, a series of circumstances that they are not responsible for. This is, and will probably always be true, and the theory of privilege is simply a means to observe that. The best place to keep this theory appears to be in the abstract, a matter of relative probability and a means to provoke sympathy and thought, to recognize your disadvantages while at the same time making use of your advantages. What do you think? Are there any privileges that should have been listed on this bulletin board? Are any of the privileges that are on this bulletin board too conditional to really qualify as a privilege, in your opinion? Let it be known what you think about the characteristics and circumstances listed here, and which ones you think should or should not be considered privileges in the grand scheme of things. Thanks for watching. Having your attention truly was a privilege.
Keep on smiling, 'cause when you're smiling,